Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Archive 81, Episode 1. It's called Mysterious Signals, and since it is a new show, I will start spoiler free. I'll give my general thoughts, explain the premise, that kind of thing, and then we'll get into the more spoilery beats of the episode. Yeah, I wasn't really that clued in on this one. This was just a show that I found when I was looking for pilots for the Patreon vote for the month. And I was like, okay, it's produced by James Wan. It's a horror show. It's been a while since Netflix, outside of Squid Game, notably, has made something that I have been excited about. But it seems interesting. So yeah, it's I got a little bit of a red flag at the start of the episode because it starts off like basically just like every crap found footage movie with like some really hard to see, staticky footage, close up on a face as they're saying find me, and it goes to the opening titles. But luckily it's not actually a found footage show, at least not completely, and that is like the best of both worlds. I think what works about found footage when it's working is good in small doses, right? The idea of having like the more limited camera that's a bit rougher to look at, that makes it feel grimy or shaky or more realistic, to give it that kind of sense. Having that the whole time and having to sort of like come up with reasons why you're doing it that way the whole time and why the person's still filming is a bit of a tired, I say tired, it's an exhausted trope at this point. I'm so sick of that genre. But there is a reason why it works in places and why certain films have been good with it, and I always prefer when it's part of the plot of something else that isn't entirely that way. This is still a traditionally shot TV show with cinematography, with all these things, but it factors into the plot, right? The idea of watching footage factors into the plot. The main character in this is called Dan, and he restores film. He restores damaged tape for a film museum, and he is hired to basically restore this mysterious set of tapes from an old DV camcorder from the 90s, from 1994, that were recovered from a fire which happened in an apartment building in New York in fairly mysterious circumstances. And he ultimately takes this job, and it's about him going through the footage and kind of like learning like what happened, and creepy stuff happens, obviously, right? Creepy stuff's on the tapes. So the premise is a really fun one. I actually love the idea of like following a character with this job. I just don't feel like I've seen it that much, and obviously I'm a movie nerd, so yeah, like I kind of like the fact that there's some movie references in this, like just posters in the background, because they would naturally be there at a museum that deals with film. Late in the episode, he actually sits down to watch Solaris from 1972, which we actually just did on the movie channel, Male Fuzz Movies, on the Atomic Cinema Experiment. Me and Tara reviewed that movie just a few weeks ago. So fun getting those moments in there. But I've always loved the idea of like, messages hidden in static, and then perhaps more towards this is the idea of like found footage, not in the genre sense, but in the idea of actually uncovering footage and finding out what's on it, and that factoring into a mystery and revealing things as it goes. Like I always like that idea. It's something that you kind of lose a little bit in the digital world, where any attempt I've seen to try and make computers kind of creepy or like distorted or something, it's just not the same as static. There's something about signals and messages in the frequencies between the actual like channels or stations or whatever it may be. Like there's something about that that's just kind of like cool and eerie in places. So I'm down with the general vibe it's trying to hit. Certainly, I would say that. As for the quality of the show, it's not a bad first episode, actually. I have some nitpicks. I have some concerns about this lasting 8 episodes. Like, this felt like a fairly good, first third to first half of a movie. And I am astonished that it's going to last, something in the realm of 6 to 7 more hours, because there's 8 episodes, and I didn't check the length of the rest of them, but I think this one was almost a full hour, so I imagine most of them are probably in that ballpark. And I just like I'm a little baffled like I guess what I'm worried is not just that it can maintain the eerie atmosphere that it's kind of done a decent job building up. It's more that to have enough plot points to last 8 episodes, I'm worried that it's going to lose its simplicity and get more convoluted. And even stuff that's revealed at the end of this first episode starts to hint at a more convoluted story that's going on beyond something. Because sometimes I think horror works better when it's a little simpler, which is why I think horror TV shows have struggled for me by and large. Not all of them, but they have struggled with me a little bit more than a horror movie, which is only 90 minutes to 2 hours tends to be. So yeah, so that'd be my biggest concern going forward. But that's not necessarily talking about the quality of what's in this first episode. I do think there's a couple of plot beats in this that are extremely obvious and predictable, and not that they try and treat them like they're a big deal necessarily. There is a trope in one of the reveals that it's not a coincidence in this, that it is definitely like you can sort of see the reasoning and the setup for it, and it makes some sense, but it's just a trope I'm not particularly fond of when it comes to these types of like stories. I mean, if any horror story really. Other than that though, I actually do think the watching of the footage is mostly kind of enjoyable. There is one weird like one weird thing I would point out is that it's a little straight, because what I thought was going to happen is that part of this was going to be that the tapes would be in a random order, right? He's hired to look through these tapes and like, you know, bring them all back to viewing and digitize them and clean them up, all that stuff. I thought, okay, well, it's just a bunch of tapes they got from a burned down building, but when he starts going through them, he's going through them in order, like they're in sequential order as far as we can tell. Maybe they'll surprise us later and there'll be one that's out of order or something, but so far it's in order, because he gets like a test one before he's offered the job, and that's definitely, at least it feels like the first one, because it's like before the incident really starts. It's just kind of setting it up, and then the next tape he goes to when he's actually at the job is like, here's like the next part, and I'm like, who organized these? Maybe there was labels on them that were numbered, and they just know because it's actually kind of obvious, but I didn't notice any reason why it would be perfectly in order. So maybe they'll play with that later, but at least this episode I was all about thrown that it was just like, oh, they're just in order, okay. But you've got the mystery. Obviously the story of what's on the tapes has its own thing going. Like, you've got the mysterious company that hires him to go out to this remote place in the woods to work on this project, so he's isolated and all the usual horror stuff, and you know that mostly works quite well. I think the actor who plays Dan, Mamadou Athey, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing his name there, but I actually quite like him. He has a very kind of natural quality to him that feels very unactory, and I mean that as a compliment. He doesn't feel like a Hollywood actor who's like overdoing things or being like glamorous, or he feels like a really normal dude. Right down to his voice, he kind of feels like a normal guy, and I think that actually works. It's probably for the benefit of the show, to be honest. And then the other lead is actually the one who's on the tapes. So Melody is the character. She's this university student in 1994 who's doing an oral history report. So that's why she's recording. I mean, she's recording everything, and she's doing like a documentary, effectively, on this apartment building that she's moving into, because it was built on the ruins of a mansion that used to be there. So I mean, immediately you're like, okay, if there's going to be spooky stuff, was this place that was here before haunted? You know, these are all the sort of things that start running through your mind. But that's kind of the setup, and like there's, you know, at first Dan doesn't want to take the job. He's like, no, this is kind of weird. This big mysterious company's asking me to go out to the middle of nowhere and work on this restoration project, take me away from my regular job. But he does have this motivating factor, which I'll get into in spoilers, that kind of gets him on the path and makes him want to do it. Yeah, you know, in the episode, I think full hours might be a bit tiring if they're all this long. I think it's okay for this first one, in the same way that some pilots do benefit from a bit of extra time, because like a good bit of time at the start of the episode to establish who Dan is, what his job is, that he enjoys restoring film. There's a nice little moment where he's restoring like a lost film from the end of the 50s, and it's kind of violent, and even that's got a sort of a creepy vibe to it because they're kind of watching this. It's a little bit disturbing, and his friend's like a podcaster who does like spooky stories, so like he's into kind of like talking about supernatural stuff, and he's kind of becoming, by the end of the episode, he's the guy that Dan calls for advice and to research, because he has no internet like out in this compound that he's doing all this work on his own. So he has to call his friend to go and do the research and do the googling. I mean, it's got the ingredients to be a fun show, and I will say that there's a good couple of moments in this first episode. It's got a couple of those moments where, like, as Dan's watching closely because he thinks he sees something on the tape, you're kind of paying close attention just to see if you can see what it is, and then it'll kind of hit you with something. It'll hit you with not a jump scare necessarily, but like it'll hit you with a bit of an image, and you'll be like, "Oh, I see something," and that's kind of fun, and that works. The elements that are a little bit more predictable or kind of feel more like a TV trope kind of thing, because I always say episode 1 should have a hook at the end, and this does. I'd say the hook at the end is kind of it's a 2-part hook. One of them is kind of connected to the trope that I was saying I didn't like very much. More on that in a minute in spoilers. And then the other one was just like a very predictable and, well, obviously the first, I assumed the second the plot got going, I assumed this part. So I would say that it does like structurally play with a hook at the end. I would say that if you're, unless it's the first time you've ever watched a TV show, or you've never watched any kind of like horror or thriller before, maybe you'll be like surprised and hooked by the ending. I will say it was kind of the obvious thing that I just assumed was already happening. I mean, that's not a huge complaint. Like, while there's a couple of little tropes and a couple of moments that make me go, by and large, I had a decent time watching this, and I would say it's definitely worth checking out the first episode. Like I say, my concern that maybe it'll have too many twists and plot beats, and it'll get too convoluted because it has to keep doing more things. It has to have more hooks and more twists and so on throughout the episodes, is that I don't know if I'm going to like that story as it evolves, because ultimately I might prefer this to be simpler, but there's only one way to find out if that's the case. So and it's unfair to like just assume it's going to be bad. Like, I'm not doing that at all. But that would be my main concern at this point. Episode 1 of Archive 81 is not bad, not half bad. So I'll say spoilers now. Spoiler warning from this point on, just so I can talk about a few of the things, because the big thing that I'm dodging throughout this is so he doesn't want to take the job at first, right? So full spoilers here. He doesn't want to take the job, but then he notices when he's looking back at the footage of the sort of the test tape, the little one that he got to sort of like see if he was good at his job. The first tape with the woman Melody like introducing herself on it. He notices that she has a photograph in the background, a Polaroid, because it's 1994, of her and a dog. But notably, this dog looks like his dog that he had as a kid. With the same collar, and he suddenly thinks it might be his dog, and he's not 100% sure, because it's like old standard definition DV tape footage from 1994, and it's a Polaroid in the background of said footage, so it's just not like, if it was the same breed of dog with a red collar, it's going, it'll look like his dog. It's not like a million miles off to suggest that maybe it's just a very similar looking dog, but this intrigues him enough that he wants to know. He wants to see more and see if there's anything to this. And his backstory, as we're kind of like sort of like revealed throughout, is that his family died in a fire when he was a kid, and he was out walking the dog when this happened. We get like little brief flashbacks to this here or there. Very, very quick snippets. They don't really dwell on it too much. And we also know that he had a mental breakdown at some point in his adult life. Which is referenced a few times, which maybe they're leaving that in there as a potential, like maybe he's imagining some of this stuff. Given the ending, the final shot, I suspect that's not true. Like I mean, unless they really sort of try and frame it in a certain way, I don't think you can necessarily convince me that he's just imagining stuff. Yeah, so he goes out because he recognizes his dog in part of the footage. Then maybe his dog, right? You know, it's not like a surefire thing, but he goes out and he's introduced to this building, this compound, where he'll be working. And the first thought I had actually, as soon as the rich guy leaves that was introducing him to everything, who's, you know, pretending to be nice enough about, you know, everything and saying, hey, you know, if you need anything, you know, call us and make sure the bed's comfortable and, well, you know, anything you need, you just reach out. The second he leaves, there's a moment where Dan tries to like go into an archive room that has a lot of tapes in it, but he doesn't have the code for the keypad. He's not meant to go in there. And the first thought I had was, well, if you try and get in there, they're going to, like, I assume they're watching you. Like, they have to be watching you. Why wouldn't you assume there's cameras all over this place? This is eerie as shit. And then, sure enough, the final shot of the episode is the reveal that he is being watched. You know, the camera pulls back from a monitor, and there's a guy watching tons of monitors all around the compound. So, I mean, that's what I kind of meant when I said that the final moment is like, well, yeah, no shit. Like that, I assumed this immediately as soon as he got there. So that wasn't much of a moment. But the other thread of this, though, to go back to him recognizing his dog, or potentially his dog, is that as the episode goes on, there's more things that connect back to his life. One of the big things that happens when Melody moves into the apartment is that her first night there, she hears music coming from, like, I think it's like the air conditioner. Like, she hears like music coming through it, and it's kind of creepy. Dan says he kind of recognizes it, and it's kind of weird. And then the next day, Melody on the tapes is interviewing a composer who's in the building. And she's like, oh, I must, that's what I heard last night. I heard you playing last night. And the woman's like, no, I wasn't here. I was performing somewhere. But when she plays the CD of her music, it's, you know, as that track, it's the music she heard. And, like, again, Dan's like, I recognize this. So he asks his friend to look up the composer, and she doesn't exist. Much like the company that hired him, much like the girl who's on the tapes, like, there's very little public information about any of them, if any. It's all very kind of weird and creepy that there's, like, just no record of these people at all. That's actually one of the things that I do like about the premise, actually, is the idea that there's an apartment building in the middle of New York City, you know, the most famous city in the world, the most urban city in the world, you might say. And right in the middle of it, there's a building where people might just disappear. Like, there's something really cool about, like, because it's very easy to do, like, the creepy house in the middle of the forest or the middle of nowhere, or you know, desolate places, but the idea of doing it in the middle of a bustling metropolis is actually kind of fun to me. And maybe it's just because we don't do it enough. We don't do it as much as the other options, so maybe that's why I like it. It's just a bit fresher, but I kind of, you know, I dig it. We actually get, like, some flashbacks at this point of, like, when he's walking his dog as a kid, he's humming this music, and then we see him, like, playing this music at the piano with his sister before she died. And their dad walks in and, like, looks annoyed that they're playing that track. Like, he recognizes it and tells them to stop. So it's like, oh, okay, all right. So there's definitely, this song's definitely linking back to something. One of the complaints I might have at this point, when it's, like, revealing more connections to our main character's backstory, would be that maybe there's, oh, this is really coincidental, right? But it's not. Like, no, I get it. Like, he's been chosen by the company. This company has chosen him because of who he is. Because he is tied to this in some way, and he clearly doesn't know about it. And it's notable that, yes, his family died in a fire in their house, and the apartment building also, you know, burned up, killed people with fire. Like, so there is a trend, there's a connection even just there between those two elements. So the big sort of, like, hook, though, if you want to call it that, is right before the ending. The last thing he sees in the tape is his dad actually shows up on the tape. He actually shows up with what seems like guards from, like, a mental hospital or something like that, to, like, grab Melody, because Melody's yelling. I'll get into what she's yelling about, but, like, he shows up to grab her, possibly to cover up the disappearance of a teenage girl that was also on the tapes, which I'll get into that in a minute. But it's a big moment where he's like, Dad, and he's like, the tears come down his eyes, and that's right before we see the guy watching him on the cameras. And it's like, okay, you're doing this, you're setting up that his dad's involved in something with this company or with the building or whatever spooky shit was going on there, and he is tied to this. And that's fine, that's totally fine. I'm still kind of on board to see where that goes. But I do worry that if we have to have like twists and turns every episode, that it's going to get really like, I thought it's going to lose its mystique, because it's just going to be so just so layered in a way that I don't know if I'll find satisfying. It may be cool mythology wise, but it might lose its creepiness because it's just so complex. But yeah, the other stuff in the tape is that there's a teenage girl. The only person who really like befriends Melody and talks to her is this teenage girl who kind of like, I don't know, like does small jobs for people in the building for a little bit of money. She she goes and picks up people's papers, or she'll get their mail or something, or, little odd jobs that a teenager might do for a bit of cash. She befriends her and asks her for help, but when she interviews the girl herself, she has this moment. It's probably the creepiest moment in the episode, actually. And I think the acting from the girl is probably one of the big things that really sells it, is that she just kind of like stops talking at one point in the middle of the interview and just looks like dead ahead and terrified, and it seems like she's kind of picked up, not like way up in the air, but just up to her feet. But you kind of get that vibe that something's picking her up rather than her standing up. And then she effectively has a seizure. But as the seizure's happening, so this is really well performed, but as the seizure's happening, and Dan's looking very concerned about what's going on, like the screen goes static, and there's like a lot of interference, and like just like the tape's going to shit. But during the static, you can kind of see what looks like a humanoid figure at first, kind of in the snow. And then it's like, I almost want to say it's like an alien head, like the shape of an alien, like either an alien or some sort of really elaborate demon or something, but it's not like a human head. It looks like it's got like almost like the Alien Queen head or something, or like the heads from Independence Day, like one of those types of like sort of hard shell kind of triangular style heads. But it's a good creepy moment. It's sort of a typical moment you'd expect in a concept like this, but it was fun and it did have some creepy vibes, so I really can't complain too much about that. I didn't find myself rolling my eyes too much. I think it's a very, if not spectacular direction, I would certainly say that it's at least solid. I'd go above serviceable and say solid. That almost sounds like a backhanded compliment, but I'm just, I'm so used to a lot of these Netflix shows just feeling like the direction is just this phoned in element where it's not that big a deal in most of these Netflix shows. So, and I think for horror, you kind of need to have some directorial flair. Like you do, like the pacing of the scenes like really matters for a start. This moment landed for me, so. And I think it had to. It's kind of the biggest money moment, and then maybe outside the hook of like the dads like showing up in the tapes at the end. So the big thing is this girl disappears. It cuts to footage of her being okay, and I like that it cut back to Dan at this point to show he was relieved that she was okay, even though it's very lately she's probably going to die in the fire with everyone else. Although notably, no one's officially been pronounced dead. They're all just missing. Their bodies went missing in the fire, which is actually kind of creepy out of itself. But then it cuts to kind of the next part of the tape. It just jump cuts, and Melody's yelling, he took her," about I think it's the landlord or the caretaker of the building. Yeah, so it kind of jumps to this thing where this girl has disappeared. So I guess that's the other thing the episode does fairly well, is that it makes you like this girl because she's nice to Melody. She offers assistance, and she has this kind of scary moment where you realize that this is kind of creepy. You kind of want her to be okay, which mirrors the main character of Dan, so that's a really nice touch. It kind of puts us in his shoes a little bit, and then she's just taken away, and that's kind of unsettling and creepy. So, I mean, that's good. It's a good beat. It's a good. I mean, honestly, like the dad showing up obviously is a big plot point, but to me, the best part of that jump cut to her being missing is just that part itself. It's her being missing suddenly with no explanation. That's the the Blair Witch Project, that one of them just disappeared in the middle of the night and they don't know where he is. Like that's that kind of feeling, and it's not as effective as that because it's it's one of the things you hold up on the high horse when you're talking about found footage style moments. But cutting to a person watching this footage so that it has an impact on someone is definitely very refreshing versus actual found footage movies. Not bad. I would say it's worth a look. I would definitely tell horror fans to check it out and see if they like it. I certainly have no reasons to say no, stay away from it. It's pretty good. First episode. I actually would quite like to watch some more of it. I don't know. Well, will I have time to? I'm not entirely sure. I've definitely got enough things to get through in the next couple of days that it's not happening like tomorrow. Possibly Sunday, maybe if I've got time. I will have a look at episode 2. And if people actually watch this first review, I will maybe commit to actually watching the season. But it is 8 episodes. I'm not sure if it's billed as a limited series or a season 1. It feels like the sort of thing that if it did get multiple seasons, it might be more anthology style. But that is Archive 81. So by all means, have a look at it and see if you're into it. It's not bad. It's not bad so far. So yeah, there you go. That's Archive 81. Let me know what you thought of the first episode in the comments if you have seen it. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. All those things help out on YouTube, so please hit the buttons. And of course, you can support everything we do over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month. And as I mentioned earlier, at the $10 tier, there is a pilot priority vote every month now for the following month, where I'll prioritize what pilots I'm checking out based on how the voting there goes. So go and have a look, see if you're interested, and thank you very much once again for watching. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?